Hello and welcome to Weird Around Illinois. As we have threatened for a few weeks now, we are speaking with Chad Lewis today, and we couldn't be more excited. We've been looking forward to this for a while. I will tell you a little bit about Chad Lewis. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he is an author, having written a whole bunch of books. I can't even name how many books you've written, Chad, but some of our favorites are the Wisconsin Road Guide to Mysterious Creatures, the Illinois Guide to Haunted Places, and the Backroads Lore series is something I'm just starting to check out now. But you've written about basically every type of cryptid, paranormal phenomenon, and general piece of weirdness in the Midwest, from what I've seen. And of course, Chad is also on TV and film, having done TV series like The Unexplained and Expedition X and Scariest Monsters in America. And most recently, I saw you on Terror in the Skies, a movie that I caught on Tubi. Basically, when I watch my shows on Tubi, I see you about every other one. And of course, Chad also does lectures around the Midwest, a lot of library tours and paranormal events, of which we just caught you at one recently. So basically, when it comes to Midwest cryptids, you're kind of the guy.
Well, greetings from the back roads of Wisconsin, and it's great to be here talking about one of my favorite states of, weirdness around Illinois.
Well, thank you. And we're very fond of Wisconsin as well. We've probably spent as much time looking for weirdness up there as we have in Illinois, which is why we had to make the podcast Weird Around Illinois instead of Weird in Illinois. Plus, Wisconsin, most of my favorite restaurants are in Wisconsin, so we just can't avoid it.
Okay. Where do you like to stop? What's your go-to spot if you can?
Well, there are a few of them. I mean, close to the border. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Probably the first one that came to my mind immediately was Fred's.
Oh, yeah.
Freddy's?
Fred's, yeah.
Okay, so I got it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we went there anyway, I forgot where exactly it is, but
Jefferson, I think.
Okay, Jefferson. They had great burgers. I mean, it suddenly became our number one burger place we've ever gone to at the time.
And we discovered it when we were checking out the Beast of Bray Road, so it was just like, a 15-minute drive from there.
Yeah.
And aren't those the best, when you just kind of run into them, or just all of a sudden you're there and you didn't anticipate it?
Exactly. Those are just the best spots. I mean, some are like, some are... there's really no in between, really. It's either really, really good or really, decent.
Their cheese curds were really good, too.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone loved those.
And homemade potato chips. Those were great.
Yeah.
And that's become kind of a feature when we do our expeditions. We always look for some out-of-the-way restaurant that we would normally not be at. We never go to like chain restaurants or anything when we're on an expedition, except once we went to Taco Bell. But that was because the Mothman was sighted literally right next to the Taco Bell, so we had no choice.
Yeah.
But
I've been saying for years that, part of the adventure is, yes, the legends are great, but hitting the back roads, stopping at roadside attractions, and those mom and pop weird restaurants. I mean, that's kind of the stuff you remember right along with the legends.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the great thing is, as you well know, your chances of finding Bigfoot or Dogman or a Mothman on any given expedition are pretty slim, but your chances of finding a good meal are pretty good. And, at least that gives you something to talk about and something to remember when you come back.
Yeah. I remember
there are so many adventures I've been on where I remember stopping at the biggest ball of twine or some weird roadside attraction that I'm a sucker for, that because you're right that you're not going to bump into the Beast of Bray Road and a Mothman swerving at your car and Bigfoot in the woods and some haunted cemetery spirit follows you home. So it's often the mundane stuff, or what we consider the mundane, that stand out. It's kind of like, tense moments on vacations or mishaps that years later, that's what you remember.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking we went on vacation to Ohio once, and we're going to the Appalachian Mountains to look for Bigfoot. And encountered a restaurant. We thought it was like someone's house at first, but then we actually went into it. It was called Wild Willie's, and their burgers were actually really good.
Yeah. You never know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
And I was going to recommend to you, I saw that you've got a speaking engagement in Racine, in a week or so. And if I'm guessing you've traveled all over Wisconsin, so you may have your own spots there, but the popular local spot there is Wells Brothers Pizza. I've been there once, and you go there on a Friday or Saturday night, you're going to wait a bit to get in, but it is worth it. It's pretty good pizza.
Wells Brothers. Okay, I'll have to check that out.
So one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, I think I mentioned that we just recently saw that Terror in the Skies movie, and there was a lot of good information in there from you and a lot of other cryptid hunters and paranormal specialists. And what really struck me, because it keeps coming up in our podcast, is the Thunderbirds, like the sightings in Southern Illinois. I mean, on an earlier podcast, we discussed, even my brother had a sighting of a Thunderbird once. And I often have trouble kind of reconciling those reports with some of the other reports that kind of sound similar. Like, I know you've talked a lot about the Van Meter monster, or the Van Meter visitor. I think you've even got a book coming out on that, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, there's the Chicago Mothman. And as I was reading about the Chicago Mothman, a lot of those sightings, particularly on the fringes of Chicago, sounded more like Thunderbird sightings to me. And I was just wondering if what you found in your research and where you stand on the Illinois Thunderbird. What do you think about it in terms of how real it is and just what impact it's having on other cryptid sightings?
Of course, the Thunderbirds go back to indigenous cultures, and they believe that these gigantic bird-like creatures, or in many of the cultures, they were giant birds that would often be so humongous that when they flapped their wings, it sounded like thunder, and that also they would often appear during thunderstorms and lightning bouts. So they would sometimes be seen as an omen of good luck or bad luck, depending on the culture, but they would be more of your normal bird, but just of gigantic proportions. And we have one origin story here in Wisconsin at our most popular state park, Devil's Lake, where it is said the lake was formed when the sea serpents of the lake were battling the giant thunderbirds of the sky, and the thunderbirds would shoot down rocks around the shoreline enclosing the lake, and the sea serpents would shoot up spouts of water at the thunderbirds, and finally the sea serpents won, and the thunderbirds flew off to Illinois. And that's where we believe the Thunderbird story of Illinois comes from. But when it comes to these creatures like the Point Pleasant Mothman or the Van Meter visitor, these things seem to be something other, where the Van Meter visitor creature was more of this featherless bird-like creature, 8 feet tall with giant leather-like wings that had a horn on its head. It could project light. It was impervious to weapons, much different than the traditional Thunderbird or the Piasaw bird of Alton, Illinois. So there are a lot of differences besides both of them being in the sky and being too big to fly.
And I just had a quick question. Why do you think there's like sightings in like central and southern Illinois, but not so much like around Chicago, at least for Thunderbird?
Well, Thunderbirds originally, would have been before the big cities. They would have been on the plains or where these indigenous peoples gathered along waterways. And that remains very similar today with water sightings, or at least around waters or rivers or lakes. These water beings, not water panthers, but the Thunderbirds. And oftentimes when you get to these big cities, most people aren't gazing up at the sky. They're too busy looking where they're going or not to bump into someone else. So even though there have been tons of the Chicago Mothman sightings in and around the Chicago suburbs, when you're talking these giant Thunderbirds, they seem to be more in places where people have a little more open sky.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing that kind of came up when we talked about the Chicago Mothman, or more like when we looked at the Chicago Mothman on that movie, we had always just kind of taken it at face value. Whenever we get a report, we're always taking it at face value. We're assuming that people don't have a reason to hoax us. People don't have a reason to, just make up something off the top of their head. But it seems like in the case of a few of those Mothman sightings in Chicago, they've really been called into question. And I wasn't quite sure how to handle that, to be honest. As a paranormal investigator, I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say there is no Chicago Mothman. But on the other hand, I find myself looking with more of a skeptic's eye on everything that came out of those reports.
I'm right with you. I'm extremely torn over the Chicago Mothman sightings because my good friend and colleague Allison Jornlin has debunked some of the sightings, proving that they just couldn't have happened the way people say they happened. That person said they saw it out of a 5-story building or something, and it's not there. Mm-hmm. She traveled to a lot of these. But on the other hand, I've talked with my colleagues Tobias Wayland and Lon Strickler, and they have really credible, great sightings from people that seem very legit. So I'm on the fence as well. And I don't know if it has to be one or the other, that there can be. And I've experienced this with all sorts of creatures. I did a book on a lake monster of the Mississippi River, and it's in a lake on the Mississippi called Lake Pepin, and it's called Pepe the Lake Monster. And we have stories going back to the first indigenous people. We have newspaper accounts going back to the Civil War about something big being in that lake. And I can't tell you how many people have contacted me saying, oh, I made the legend up in the 1980s as a fun little play off of my friends, or I made it up to get tourists to come here in the 90s. And I have to always tell these people, you may have made up a story about it, but the legend has been going for 200 years before you made up your hope. So that happens quite a bit. So back to the Chicago Mothman. Yeah, I'm really on the fence. I think there are some credible sightings, and obviously there are ones where it couldn't have happened the way they said it happened.
Right. I'm glad you said that, because that was I just can't go 100% one way or the other on that, because it's well, for one thing, we can't throw out all the sightings, because we actually had one of the people who originally reported something to Lon Strickler come and contact us and say, hey, I'm the guy who reported this on Phantoms and Monsters, and this is what I saw. And so, obviously that is most likely a real person, not somebody, who's just there to pad the numbers, so to speak. So, and obviously he felt passionate enough about it to contact multiple outlets, not just kind of pile onto the one place where they were all taking the Mothman reports, or the one or two places. So that lent some credence to it, and we had another report of the Chicago Mothman completely outside of the paranormal community. I was actually talking to someone completely apropos of nothing. They said, hey, I think I just saw the Mothman. And, it led to an investigation, which, of course, is another problem we face. If somebody tells us where they saw Dogman, or where they saw Bigfoot, or where, there's a haunted road or a haunted house, that's pretty easy to check out. But how the heck do you look for Mothman?
Yeah, exactly. And I tend to fall in the same category as you previously mentioned, that until somebody gives me a reason not to believe them, I believe that they're being genuine, they're being honest. Most overwhelming majority of people, witnesses I've spoken with over the last 30 years, have been, normal, rational, intelligent, down-to-earth people who have just experienced something out of the ordinary. And I think in order to do this for a long time in this field, you have to approach it in the idea that people are being honest with you. And of course, you're going to get people who make up a hoax or just try to fool you or maybe embellish a story a bit. But I think overall, a lot of these people are just trying to come to some explanation as to what they've experienced. And at least that's the way I approach it.
Yeah, there's a reason why, the term like being neutral in journalism is, pretty common, because you gotta be neutral in every account that you receive and just make out whatever you can find from the evidence that you're given.
And I really ask myself the question of what's too weird when you're dealing with the weird? Where do you cut off stories? If somebody tells you about a chupacabra sighting, is that too bizarre? Or a vampire or werewolf? Where do you draw the line when everything you're dealing with is weird? And for me, I usually do not have a line. That the story can be as wacky and wild because it still has some merit to me of why it's doing that. I've had people tell me that they have Bigfoot on their property and that the Bigfoot creatures are living in a alternate dimension where they're having pool parties and barbecues. And at that point, you're probably stretched to your believability. But at the same point, like I said, I try not to rule anything out because it might just be that you're missing out on some new legend or story because I happen to think it's too weird.
Yeah, I think we have the same philosophy on that. Because we've had guests on here, people who've seen things or claim to have seen things, and after our podcast, sometimes we're contacted by people saying, "Hey, where'd you find that guy?" But when we're listening to it, we are listening with a completely open mind because we don't know the truth and we don't claim to know the truth, and it's not really our right or our ability to judge someone else's experience and say, this happened or this didn't happen. I can only think of one instance where I've actually called someone out for being fake, and that wasn't a person, that was an institution that I think was falsifying some ghost reports. But for the most part, we're pretty open-minded.
I can't tell you how many people have approached me and said, I don't believe in ghosts or UFOs or whatever it might be, but this is what I saw. Where they're skeptics, they may not necessarily even believe in it, but they've had an experience they'd like to tell about. And I've had people who have told me a story. They said, I haven't told anyone this in 40 years. I don't want you to investigate or research it. I just didn't want to go to the grave with me with that without telling somebody. So I think sometimes people get a bit cynical saying every witness wants to be on TV or write a book or something of that nature. But for a lot of it, it's just trying to figure out the same thing we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird out there, and each of us sees different parts of it, and I think sometimes you just have to share that with people.
Oh, I agree. And over the years, when I first started researching this stuff 30 plus years ago, it was always thought that, let's say 4 people in a car saw a UFO, and that you'd get out and you'd interview them separately. And if they all explained the same thing and jotted down the same details and made a sketch of the same looking thing, you thought that was more credible, that, yep, they're all seeing the same thing. This couldn't possibly be a hoax. But over these decades, what I'm finding is that oftentimes people are experiencing something different, that you and I could be in a car looking at a UFO and you see it as one way, I might encounter it in completely different. Whereas back in the early days, we would have seen that as a hoax or they're making it up. Whereas today, it seems like it adds credibility because we know that we all experience things differently.
Yeah, and one of the extremes of that, I think this was credited to Lon Strickler, but I think it was actually in one of Tobias's books, where, again, talking about the Mothman, Lon Strickler put forth the idea that maybe some people could see it and some people couldn't. I mean, that's like the extreme case of, different people experiencing different things. But it kind of blew my mind when I read that. I was like, okay, I don't know the scientific or mystical reason for it, but if that's true, boy, that would explain a lot in the paranormal world.
Yes, and dealt with that quite a bit over the years. Like I said, you might have 4 people in a car and only 2 of them can see the UFO, and the others are saying, "What are you staring at?" So I think we're just kind of getting to that cusp of researching these things and maybe digging a bit deeper into why and how.
Yeah, definitely. Well, with that in mind, why don't we talk about some of the ground that we've all covered between the 4 of us, and see what our different perspectives are. You know, we've been reading your books and going over some of your lectures, and we have covered a lot of the same ground. And I made like a short list here, just going through it. The first thing that comes to my mind is Cuba Road, or Cuba Road, depending on how you want to pronounce it. We've been there several times, and I believe you've been there a time or 2 yourself. Did you have an overriding take on that, Cuba Road? If it was, did you feel something there in terms of haunting, or was it just an interesting story, or how did you feel?
I tried to, every place that I write about or talk about, I go and visit for myself, hopefully multiple times, day and night, trying to get a feel of not only what people might be seeing, but what else could be an explanation. And with Cuba Road, or however you want to pronounce it, I really wish I had been there 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When it was more secluded and less known. But I never tend to get a feel of, if there's a list of people with psychic ability, I'm last on that list in the world.
We're not far ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly. But I do feel like there are places where you say, wow, I could see something happening here, but nothing out of the ordinary happened for me there. I thought it was just another road, and the White Cemetery, I believe, right down the road from it.
Yeah.
Is another place where I thought, this is cool, but I don't know what I was expecting, but yeah, I didn't gather anything that out of the ordinary. How about you guys?
I'll let you guys speak to that. I have my own opinion, but I'll let you guys say it.
All right. Well, from the first time we went there, it was at night. I think it was only like 8 o'clock at night. We didn't experience much. I mean, it's just going down a road, occasionally going slow, making sure that, determine if there's some reason of what other people have seen. But yeah, there was really nothing much out of the ordinary there.
We checked out the cemetery too, and I don't remember seeing anything there.
Now, one thing that I didn't really realize was a thing until I read it in one of your books was the idea that you couldn't take pictures of the White Cemetery, that there's like a curse or something that the picture will never show up. But we took plenty of pictures, and there was no problem.
Yeah, I did not know about it. Yeah, we took plenty.
And obviously you did too, because they were in the book.
Yeah, I joke about that, even though you can just search it online and find hundreds and hundreds of photos. But that's a very common occurrence, that it was thought that at some of these places that no matter how many times you tried or how many different cameras you used, mainly to when people used film, 35 millimeter film, where people would take a whole row of photos at these places and then find that there's nothing on it. It was black or just blotted out. And that continued into digital. And not only would these things affect your digital cameras and your phones, but I did a program on Coast to Coast one time about Robert the Doll, this cursed doll down in Key West, Florida. And some guy contacted me angry. He said, "You should have warned me, because I just went to search for it and my computer crashed on me." And it wasn't even that he took a picture of it or erased the family photos from their vacation of Florida. Nothing of that matter. He simply searched for it. His computer, died out on him, and he was upset because Robert the Doll cursed him.
Wow. I think we've experienced that phenomena you're talking about a lot, where we go to a place and we wish we'd been there 20, 30, 40 years earlier. I often quote the line from the movie Aliens when we get to a place, whatever happened here, I think we missed it. there are probably a few that I would throw into that, and they're on the list of places we've all been. Bloods Point Road in Belvedere, or near Belvedere. Archer Avenue, where Resurrection Mary has been seen in the past. Although when we commented on our podcast that, we felt this may have been an ancient ghost story from, 50 years ago that doesn't really happen anymore, we did have somebody email us and say, hey, we just had a sighting like 10 years ago. So, maybe it's just that we don't have whatever that thing is that triggers these ghost responses in these older sites.